This week on Serenbe Stories, we're talking about a very exciting new endeavor here at Serenbe, the Wildflower Meadow Restoration Project. Over the next 18 months, this iconic meadow connecting the inn at Serenbe to the wider community is set to undergo an incredible transformation into a permanent community of native plants that will serve as a protected pollinator and wildlife habitat. This is led by the Art Farms Environmental Council, and this project is in collaboration with organizations such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Southeastern Grasslands Institute, the State Botanical Garden of Georgia, Quail Forever, and the Bob White Quail Initiative. Guiding us through it all today are Rob Kirsch and Thomas Peters. Rob is a longtime resident of Serenbe and is also chair of the Art Farms Environmental Council. He has spearheaded this project as well as several important sustainability initiatives over the last few years. And Thomas, many of you will remember from season 7, is leading the project in his role as Serenbe's Director of Landscape and Natural Resources. In this conversation, Garnie and I chat with Rob and Thomas about the importance of native plants, pollinator habitats, the potency of controlled burning, and how they hope the Wildflower Restoration Project will be a model and inspire similar projects throughout the Southeast.
Big part of Serenbe is like innovating and then sharing. And so as this wildflower project blossoms further, we'll be able to share some of that with other communities throughout the South.
Thomas, Rob. Hi, guys. How are you? Welcome to Serenbe Stories.
Hey, Monica.
Hello. Hi, Monica.
Hi. We've got Garnie with us today.
So happy to be here.
We are here today to talk about something very exciting and close to our heart, the Wildflower Meadow, and not just that, the restoration project that's happening. So before we get into it, I think there's probably a good question for Thomas. What is the Wildflower Meadow? Tell us a little bit about the meadow itself before we get into why it needs to be restored.
So the Wildflower Meadow is on Selborne Lane. It's about 20 acres that connects the inn at Serenbe to the community at Serenbe. It's currently a grassland. It also has the community wastewater drip field infrastructure there. It's permanently going to be green space, and there's trails that pass through there. It's really important for residents as they walk to and from the inn, or guests of the inn as they traverse on foot over to the community. Historically, it was really important to the foundation of the Serenbe concept. Garnie, could you mention a little bit about that?
I was about to say, so for anyone listening that knows or wonders, like, how did Serenbe start? It was in 1999. I was on a trail run with Steve Nygren, my dad. And at that time, Serenbe was about 300 acres and was not Serenbe. It was our home. And we had a hobby bed and breakfast. And Steve and I were headed back to what was then our house, what's now the main house at the inn, and came upon a neighbor who was clear cutting 20 acres along our property line. That 20 acres is now the wildflower field. But it was that moment. We stopped running and Steve approached the person on the bulldozer. That person didn't know why he was clear cutting it. 1999 was the height of the sprawl of Metro Atlanta. So he did say, he was like, usually I've been hired to clear cut land because somebody's about to put up houses. Steve couldn't get in touch with that landowner to understand why he was clear cutting it. He spent the next 6 weeks calling all of our neighboring landowners to introduce himself and find out what their plans were. And he ended every phone call with, if you ever decide to sell, please call me first. They all called him back in 72 hours. He woke up 5 weeks later owning 700 more acres, so 1,000 acres. And the person who owned what's now the Wildflower Meadow called him back right on week 6 and said, oh, I'm just clear cutting it to put in an airstrip for a small prop plane. But the Wildflower Meadow and that story was the impetus to why people now live in the woods at Serenbe, right? And so had it not been for that moment, who knows where we would all be today.
So the restoration project, you mean it's a big field. Why would I need to restore it? What's wrong with it?
I guess the project started several years ago, really with the foundation of the Art Farm Environmental Council. We were looking at opportunities to make impactful projects around the community. I actually met Rob before the foundation of the Environmental Council. He was coming to one of my coffee talks on landscape. I like to throw out a lot of big ideas along with the typical, this is how much pine straw you get, and this is how often you pull your weeds. And I was talking about stewarding all the green space that is under Serenbe's responsibility and different ways to do things like manage for invasive species and forest health and biodiversity. And Rob came up to me and was like, hey, have you ever thought about partnering with some of the agencies out there like the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Department of Natural Resources? And I really hadn't. So we kind of had coffee a couple times thinking about this. And right about the same time, the Environmental Council was formed. Rob became the chair. I was honored to be a part of that. And a really passionate group formed. And we were looking at opportunities to do restoration on our green space. And we hosted, it was really fresh post-pandemic, we hosted a group of potential stakeholders at the inn over in the Pecan Room, including conservation horticulturalists from State Botanical Garden of Georgia, the Atlanta Botanical Garden, the Department of Natural Resources, the Fish and Wildlife Service, some local groups like Bear Creek Nature Center. And we all just got together to talk about basically land management and ways to do it to encourage biodiversity and forest health. And Wildflower Meadow was fresh under construction from a recent utility expansion out there. So it was kind of bare dirt. And we thought, what a great opportunity to do what could be considered a Piedmont prairie restoration out there. So managing it for pollinator habitat, possibly introductions of rare plants. And the partner seemed really excited about that. And so it's been a long project. It's been a couple years of just getting everybody on board and everything starting to align. So we're right at a tipping point to where we'll be sowing seed this spring.
Okay. And so we're recording this early, almost March. So just when it comes out, we're going to maybe be a little bit here or there. But Rob, tell us a little bit about what is the Art Farm Environmental Council and how'd you get roped into being the chair?
Well, environmental stewardship and environmental cause is a long passion of mine, and I am not as well equipped and as well cultured in the arts. And so I needed to find a place at the Art Farm, and this felt right and natural. Thomas and I, we sit with 7 or 8 other community members that are just incredibly passionate and talented in the same space. And as a team, I think we have a really good dynamic of working together, but then also importantly, reaching out and forming coalitions and partnerships. So one of the early things, as Thomas shared, was to build some of these points of connection with agencies so we could begin to do really big and impactful things that a group of 7 or 8 volunteers can't accomplish themselves. And so we've seeded a compost program here in Serenbe, which I hope everybody knows about and participates in.
And should be composting anywhere you live.
And should be, and it's intentionally called Compost Station Number 1 because it's the beginning of a compost network for Chat Hills in the coming years. We collaborated with the city on a Bee City designation and have recently handed that off to a diverse community board to shepherd that.
For anyone who's listening who doesn't know what a Bee City designation is, one of you share.
Well,
what is a Bee City designation?
The co-chair of that community board, Thomas Peters, could tell us.
Bee City certification is a designation through the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They prioritize native pollinator habitat and initiatives, education and outreach. So a lot of people don't understand that honeybees are not a native pollinator. They are super important to agricultural systems, but they were introduced a long time ago to North America. So just to be specific, Bee City is really looking at native pollinator species, which there's been a huge decline in pollinator species diversity in the past couple decades, up to 25% of a reduction, most studies say. So it involves creating a standing committee of community members. So we're based in Chattahoochee Hills, so we do have some Serenbe residents on that committee. Our group is inclusive of a number of other members from around the city. We've created a website, which is a requirement. That's chathillsbcity.com. Another requirement is to facilitate at least one event on pollinator education. We actually participate in 3. We partner with Bear Creek Nature Center for their Pollinator Day. The next one's staked out for May 18th. So if anyone can join for that, that'd be great. Another one is Serenbe Day. That's a partnership with the Serenbe Market, Farmers Market, and the Serenbe Landscape Committee. It's a bee-focused market day. And then we also have a booth at Ray Day where thousands of people come visit. It's a Ray C. Anderson Foundation event that happens every fall in Serenbe. So we're there. We have signage around the city posted to let people know we're a bee city. That's also a requirement. And the last requirement is the adoption of an integrated pest management plan, which would be used on city properties. It's basically a more holistic approach to managing for pests rather than just grabbing the pesticides and going after it. You consider other management practices and techniques first before choosing to treat with any kind of pesticides.
Well, and that's an interesting thing for us to point out for anybody listening is that you don't think about that sometimes, or I didn't really think about it, is that you think, oh, I'm just going to like spray for mosquitoes, or I'm going to spray for pests for on my roses or whatever. And you're actually killing everything around you, the good and the bad. And so I think that people don't realize that. They don't, I mean, because nobody, I don't think, would do it if they thought they were hurting the whole ecosystem. So I think that's a good thing to point out, is like a better way to do pest management. And, you know, like we have a lot of bat boxes here at Serenbe for like mosquitoes or let the native predators rather than we don't spray for them. So.
Everybody's so well-intentioned. It's just about education and awareness.
Exactly. A lot of us just don't know. So I think it's really important. So the compost station, Bee City, what else have you guys done? This is now the Wildflower Project's your next big project, yes?
It is. And again, each one of these projects start sort of humble and small, but they're meant to be a catalyst and a spark for others. And so this restoration project is meant to be the beginnings of a series of restoration projects that will stretch throughout Chattahoochee Hills. As we all know, we have a lot of protected land, both inside and outside of Serenbe. And so what we can do across these 13 acres should be a roadmap for what we do across the next 1,300 acres. So
great. Well, and I know one of the interesting aspects of it that sort of is jump-starting the project is controlled burn. And so we've done controlled burns on the Wildflower Meadow over the years, which is really important. But when people see fire, they get nervous. So tell us a little bit about this, Thomas. You had to go get a certification to learn how to do it. Tell us a little bit about why that's important and like what's the process so you could do it in a really safe manner.
So prescribed fire has been a part of the Georgia Piedmont ecology for thousands of years before European colonization. Native Americans used it to basically, the concept is kind of out with the old, in with the new. You're getting rid of all the old thatch in the forest. It also kind of purges disease. It creates a matrix that encourages biodiversity, creates bare soil for seeds to germinate. It adds fertility back to the soil in the form of ash. Only in the past couple decades, Forestry Commission and other agencies have started reintroducing prescribed fire as a land management technique. So I was certified with the Georgia Forestry Commission. I took a 2-day course. Fire makes me nervous too, so I learned that there was a lot of science and planning behind it. They call it a prescription for a reason. You're burning to meet an objective, a specific objective, whether it's reducing fuel loads to make forests, if the rare occurrence of a wildfire did happen, it would be less intense. Or say you're preparing to sow some seeds, so you could prescribe a fire to do that, or combat invasive species like autumn olive. You can use prescribed fire to, I guess you could say, stunt populations of invasive species instead of using chemical applications. So it really is a powerful tool. It's very fast. Unlike, I'm thinking of all the hours I've spent on a bush hog or behind a weed eater and what can now be accomplished just by a well-planned fire. So we are going to burn the Wildflower Meadow, and it'll prepare the soil well for the seed that we plan on laying early spring.
And you've been working on a few test areas, or maybe you've been doing a little bit of burn, which has been great to see on other areas, smaller areas. But this will be a real big one. When is this planned for? This spring?
It's honestly going to be in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great.
We'll burn, yeah.
With the note that today is February 27th.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
the next few weeks will be mid-March.
By the time you hear this, it will have been burned. And probably there'll be a link maybe to some of that video to see how it was done in a really interesting way.
Yeah, we're working with the weather conditions, but trying to burn a lot of areas around Serenbe. We've already done the Motto rock outcrop between Lupo and Serenbe Lane. A lot of the areas around the wastewater wetlands have been burned, and the Andrews Medicinal Garden has been burned.
And how often do you burn? Like, I'm just fascinated by, I forget what movie I was watching around like agricultural practices, but it used to be that like fire was a part of like how the earth rejuvenated and took care of itself, and we've lost that. And so now it's up to like us to help bring back safe, controlled burn practices. But how often do you have to burn something like a wildflower meadow?
Honestly, annually. Late winter, before things start to emerge, you would want to burn, and it really just provides not a blank slate, but a fresh start for the meadow. And I look forward to seeing that all over Serenbe. I think it's a tool that we'll incorporate more often in all of our natural areas.
And Thomas, in good partnership, we're hosting a Learn and Burn with some other agencies, right? So in terms of best practice here in Serenbe, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I love the name, by the way. Learn and Burn. Nice.
It's an opportunity for people who are pursuing their certification or who recently have gotten their certification or just wanting to learn more. It's an opportunity in a structured environment to observe a prescribed fire. So we are talking with some of our partners, the Bob White Quail Initiative, which is a state nonprofit, on hosting one here in Serenbe. So it'll be a good opportunity for people looking to learn.
No, it's fantastic.
In your training, is there any documentation of when we lost burning? Like, when did people stop using burning to take care of the land?
It's unfortunate, but the Smokey the Bear campaign really incited a lot of fear around fire, and an unintended consequence was just fuel loads building in the forest by not having prescribed fire. And then when a wildfire occurs, the intensity is really scary, an intense wildfire. So it's a little different in the southeast because we have such a humid environment. Out west, wildfires are rampant and dangerous, but it's very unusual to have a wildfire in the southeast. So probably beginning at the time of European colonization, it was kind of stopped, and it continued really harshly through the Smokey the Bear campaign. So it is interesting to see folks like the Department of Natural Resources and the Forestry Commission burning hundreds and hundreds of acres.
So you mentioned it gets rid of invasive species, and I think you also said if there were species that were causing problems, but like what species will sort of arise or that you're looking through with the partners that they're excited to have, I don't know, not replanted, but reintroduced, I guess would be the right word.
Yeah.
Well, some of the we're looking at host species for pollinators and good species for birds. So I guess two of the real highlighted ones would be we'd like to reintroduce the Georgia aster, which is actually a threatened species, and milkweed species, which would be the host for the monarch butterfly. The monarch population has been reduced 90% in the past 2 decades. So their overwintering grounds in Mexico used to be 45 acres in the 90s, and in 2021 it was less than 5 acres.
And that's due to just like development, or the trees are going, what's happening?
It's all of the above.
Yeah.
Pollution, pesticides, climate change, pathogens. In the case of the monarch butterfly, there's a pathogen that is hurting them, but prioritizing habitat for them would include a lot of native milkweed reintroduction. I guess those would be the main species, main plant species, but we're going to have a diverse matrix of forbs and grasses out there.
So for anyone who's listening, no matter where you live, or I should say, wherever you live is different. But as people are thinking about what can I do in my own front or backyard, and I may not live somewhere where it's big enough to do a burn, what resources would you all have for people? Where can I go to learn of how to renaturalize my space or bring pollinators into my garden? What can each person do to think about how their own yard space can participate in a larger ecosystem?
Yeah, the Xerxes Society has a ton of resources available on good plant choices and practices. Definitely the reduction of pesticides would be number one. Like Monica said, there's a lot of casualties to spraying for mosquitoes, and is spraying for mosquitoes really that effective? If you think about it, you're just throwing, in your own little bubble, you're throwing all these chemicals out, and as they dissipate, the mosquitoes are just going to come right back in. So you're going to keep up with it constantly, be having to do that. So a more holistic, integrated approach, like having bat houses or purple martin colonies, or things you can do to combat, and just watching for standing water, that kind of thing. But also Doug Tallamy is a well-known author that talks about residential landscaping to encourage pollinators, and I highly recommend his publications as well.
And there's a list of plants on the Bee City website,
That's right?
That would be appropriate to plant and propagate locally.
Yeah.
Right. And we've talked about it on Serenbe Stories. It's we really discourage lawns. Not that they don't look lovely, but they're absolutely devoid of any kind of creatures. And you're putting all these inputs in, from water to chemicals that are completely unnecessary. And it just like, I cringe now when I see those little signs that people have in their front lawns, like dogs and pets or animals or people stay off because they've sprayed it. It's just, so again, another thing like an education. Like I grew up in a house, suburban house with a big lawn in front. I don't think we ever did any lawn care system, but like it's unnecessary. Like the rewilding, like you're saying, Doug does, like it's so important. What other local wildlife we're hoping to have come back? Because you were talking about, was it a quail? Yeah. Like what else should be like coming back once you have this really lovely ecosystem of the wildflower being restored?
So hopefully a lot of bird species find refuge there and food source in the form of seed heads on grasses and flowers. But definitely the bobwhite quail, they've been in decline. Things like fire ants and armadillos and things you wouldn't think of that have reduced the quail population in Georgia. Hope to get them out here. We do have quail around Serenbe. I've seen it, just not very big coveys of them. And wild turkey, honestly.
About turkey, yeah.
I know Steve has mentioned to me before seeing them a lot in the early days, and it's not just a Serenbe thing, it's a statewide problem, the reduction in the turkey population. So I'd like to see them out there in the Wildflower Meadow. You know, we have a lot of deer out there. So hopefully it's a refuge for wildlife and people alike. You know, I'd like to see more people going out there as well for picnics or walking and enjoying the scenery.
So it's not something that just happens overnight where people are just going to show up here and they're like, wow, it's gorgeous. What has to happen? Like we've got to burn it.
Right.
And then what happens? There's a whole process.
Right.
So what's next after the burning?
So after burning, we actually have purchased, the HOA and Art Farm both purchased 1,500 bales of native grass hay that was baled up in North Georgia. Walter Bland, he had a company called Rock Springs Restoration, and he's kind of a legendary grasses guru in the native plant community. So he's actually retired, but we were lucky to grab him. We have these 1,500 bales of hay that were harvested right at the time that the seeds were mature. So we're really after the seeds, because one of the big problems with restoration is finding a seed source. Oftentimes it's not available, or you have to buy it from somewhere out of your ecoregion, which isn't ideal for restoration. So we're really fortunate to have seed available locally, and we're hoping to kind of rally the troops through volunteerism, because spreading 1,500 bales of hay by hand is going to be an endeavor. And then hopefully...
Looking at you, Monica and Garnie.
Hey, I've got my garden gloves. I'll have it head on out.
So we'll have an event out there, hopefully have food and drinks and a lot of camaraderie.
So will that be late spring, early summer? Like what's the timing?
Mid-April.
Mid-April, okay. So that's the next step. So that gets spread.
Right. And that'll be kind of the foundational mix of maybe the less exciting species that are going to get in there and hold the ground against invasive species, intrusions, and things like that. And then through our partnership, we're going to have plugs grown at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia through a program, a very new program that's being started called the Georgia Native Seed Network. It just recently got funded. But this project with our partners is very ground level, possibly largest, earliest project getting started through this initiative. We'll have supplemental material through that program in years to come. And then the goal would be actually to have our meadows serve as a source population similar to Walter's, to where we could bale our own hay and use that around the community, around the region for other restorations.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So basically the circle that you've done where you've gone and gotten hay, native grass hay from Walter, we could be a source of that.
Absolutely.
In the future. That's super cool.
The goal.
Okay. So this is super exciting. So that's going to happen over the spring, and then we'll wait for that to come up. What happens in the fall? Maybe the hay, we take the hay down and we sell it. We burn again.
Well, maybe, yeah. It might take a couple years for it to get established to that point, but we would be burning again next winter.
Okay.
Annually, I hope that that's really the only management technique that the Wildflower Meadow experiences is an annual burn. And then as it becomes a really clean source, like we would monitor it for any invasive species that would come up in there and treat them if that happens. But hopefully within 2 years, it will be a source population.
Okay, that's good to know.
Restorations, yeah.
I think one of the things that we also run into in today's society is we're impatient. And so we want to see results immediately. Yeah. And I think that really thinking about how we can be really thoughtful and what's the thing? The good things come to those who wait. Yeah.
It's a journey for sure.
A journey. And what I love about kind of hearing about, I mean, I know a lot of this, but it's always awesome to sit down and like talk about it and hear about it. And then you also like think forward to a year from now and 2 years from now, everything that like you all are working on, Thomas, that you're doing every day and that the Environmental Council at the Art Farm is helping to bring to fruition is truly making Serenbe like a learning lab, a learning everyday experiment where somebody from a class from like UGA, right, that comes and they can walk around, students can walk around and like see things in practice in a place where people are living every day and visiting every day and that it all works. That gets me excited
Yeah, a big part of Serenbe is like innovating and then sharing. And so as this wildflower project blossoms further, we'll be able to share some of that with other communities throughout the Southeast.
Of how things can happen, Of how things can happen in a place that is truly like living and breathing with people living here and visitors. It's not just like a lab or a school over in the corner. Like you can incorporate these things. So for anyone listening who is a developer or who does work for cities or counties and is in charge of green spaces and parks, like there's so much that you can do every day to bring things forward that aren't hard. It just takes a little bit of thought and intention and planning.
Well, and it's so exciting to hear that, you know, the seed source is sort of here, but maybe nascent. And then there's new native seed network, like that these things are bubbling up at the same time, but then maybe your support and what we're doing here ends up making them come to life. So what's next? Before we wrap up, what's next for the Art Farm Environmental Council? What kind of dreams do you have? Because it sounds like this was sort of a big dream and a big idea. And it's sort of like, as what happens at Serenbe, you run into the right person and the dream gets actualized. So what's next? And then what would be the big idea?
Oh gosh, the big idea. We always got to caution and moderate against big ideas because this group comes up with a lot of them. The passion is just overflowing. I think that each one of these projects that we've started over the last 2 years, there's opportunity to scale them further. And so we'll be doing that, whether that's the composting program or leaning into further awareness and education around pollinator health through the Bee City designation. And then this restoration project being the beginnings of something that we see more regionally. And there's a lot of opportunities to do that with the city and across the Chattahoochee River corridor. We've thought about other environmental causes like solar and alternative energy sources. The Art Farm is in the process of scoping out and designing our campus. On our campus, there'll be a really important education facility that will then collaborate with area schools to share both arts and environmental studies. And so that's really exciting. But, you know, this will be the form of an invitation. If there's anybody listening that has the same shared passions and has ideas that we should be taking up and energy they want to contribute to the cause and to our group, we welcome that with open arms. So please come forward.
All right. Well, we love it. I appreciate your time today. Thomas has been on before, but you were a podcast newbie. So thanks for humoring us, Rob, and
I have
joining
a face for radio. Thank you for having me.
So it's been a delight, and I appreciate your time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Monica.